Alrighty. There we go. Hello, everybody. Oh, excuse me. Hello. Welcome to our little virtual event space. I'm Allie. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rocking a headline or airline pilot look today. It is what it is. Welcome to 2021. So I am so excited to be introducing Todd Robert Petersen and Liberty Hardy tonight, here to discuss Todd's new novel, Picnic in the Ruins. So before we get into the fun stuff, I just want to really quickly thank you guys all so much for tuning in and for buying books. Your guys' support really is what keeps us going, and we really love what we do. So if you also love what we do, we'd so appreciate it if you would swing by, grab copies, or if you're not local, we do ship. Shipping is like $3.50 per book, and for the first book, and then like $1 for every book after that. And you get to support USPS too, so it's like a bonus. And I will be linking the book in the chat, so it'll take you right over to our website. While you were over on the website, I definitely recommend checking out some of our other upcoming events. We've got a really exciting year starting out here. Go ahead and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. It is just one email a week, and it pretty much just tells you exciting events that we have coming up, anything good that's going on in the bookstore, signed copies we have on hand, etc., etc. Oh, blog posts, it'll tell you about blog posts, fun, good stuff. And of course, you can always follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books, and that'll just be the quickest updates and fun recommendations. And they do like fun, cute stuff over there. Claire recently did a whole piece about the new Taylor Swift album and books that you would recommend based on your favorite song. It's like they get really creative. It's been really fun. So go ahead and check that out. So we are going to be here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which I very much hope that you do, I'm going to point you towards the Q&A box, either down at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or up at the top if you're on a phone or iPad. There is a difference between the Q&A box and the chat. In the chat, we would love to hear from you, thoughts, feelings, where you're from, connect with each other. We love to see that, but for questions, definitely throw that in Q&A so that we can actually find them when the Q&A section of the talk comes. And I think that's pretty much all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, Todd Robert Petersen teaches film studies and creative writing at Southern Utah University. Petersen's previous books include Long After Dark, Rift, and It Needs to Look Like We Tried. His newest novel is about an anthropologist researching the effects of tourism on cultural sites on the Utah-Arizona border, which spirals into a madcap adventure as the book wrestles with the question, who owns the past? In conversation with him tonight is Liberty Hardy, a senior contributing editor for Book Riot, a book fiend who reads like 500 to 600 books a year, and host of the popular and wonderful podcast, All the Books. Thank you both so much for being here. I am so excited to be a fly on the wall of this conversation. If anyone needs anything, give me a shout, and that goes for the audience too. I will be, your eyes in the sky a little bit. And the rest of you, I'm going to leave you in their capable hands. So don't forget to throw your questions into Q&A, and I will see you all soon.
All right. Todd, hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Oh, I guess it's going like the rest of America, but we're just out in the desert watching it happen rather than being other places. But it's a fun time to be watching everything parade past, isn't it?
It's something. And I have to tell you, I have moderated dozens of events, but this is the first time that I've actually done one from the future, because I am out in Maine, where it's like 6:15 now. So I want to tell you that as someone who is speaking from the future, you totally nailed this event. So
Awesome.
Just relax. You're going to do great.
No.
So I'm a huge fan of your book, which is why I'm here. I told everybody about it everywhere that I possibly could. And I'm so excited to be asking you questions about it. But before I start doing that, I would love it if you would read to us from the beginning, I believe is what you have for us.
I would love to. This is it's a little bit of a crime story. So sometimes, pulling stuff from the middle kind of messes everything up. You want to let people enjoy some of the juicy parts. But I'll read a little bit to give people just kind of a sense of, how this thing gets set up and who's part of it. All right. Byron Ashdown was twirling the small plastic skull that hung from the rearview mirror of his turquoise Ford F-250 when the old woman shut the front door. He sat up and tried to slap his brother, who dozed, with his cheek smeared against the opposite window. His hand wouldn't reach, and Byron wasn't the kind of person to lean, so his hand swiped the air. "Hey, Lonnie," he said. "She's leaving." But Lonnie didn't wake up. Byron watched her cross the covered porch of the old pioneer home and stop. She opened her handbag and rooted through it. "Okay, what now? What now?" Byron said. She walked back to the door, hesitated, looked through her bag again, then opened the door and went back inside the house. Byron cursed once and kicked the floor. Lonnie bolted awake and looked around, shouting, "What? What?" Then he said, "Come on, I was asleep." She came out, then she went back inside. "She's still in the house? Well, do you see her anywhere?" Lonnie rubbed his eyes, then squinted. The old white house sat back from the street behind a wide strip of lawn with a cluster of tall, spiraling dandelions on the north side. "That's it. We're hosed," Byron said, pounding the steering wheel. "She saw us." Lonnie turned and looked through the gun rack that covered the rear window. The street was empty. A few cars were parked by the wide gray pavement, but most were garaged. The sun was a thick yellow bead lying on the palisade of red rock that surrounded the town. He looked back through the windshield and saw more of the same. The sky was free of clouds. It was going to be a hot one. "What's to see? Just two guys sitting in a truck. That's pretty much the only thing that happens around here," Lonnie said. "If the cops come, we can just tell them we had to pull over to read our texts. And they'll think we're just a couple of Boy Scouts, right?" Byron checked the time on his banged up flip phone. It was 5 to 8. "You should get a smartphone," Lonnie said. "So they can find me?" "No thanks," Byron said. "Look, I just want to get in, get there, get the stuff, get out, get paid." "Getting worked up won't do nothing," Lonnie said, frowning at a fast food hash brown patty half eaten in its crumpled wrapper. Byron started rocking anxiously in his seat. Then unconsciously, he took the tip of his thin ponytail and painted it in figure eights across his cheek. Lonnie watched him do it and tried not to comment. After a few minutes, the old woman reemerged, her handbag snug in the crook of one arm. Byron noticed the addition of a hat. She closed the door and slid her hand along the wrought iron rail as she stepped carefully down each of the 3 steps. "Get down," Byron said, hunching below the dashboard. Lonnie joined him. "What's the hat for? Where's she going? We're screwed," Byron said. Together, they listened to the car start, then to the squeal of the steering pump, then to the silence. "Man, she's just going to church. Old ladies wear hats," Lonnie said, sitting up first. "The coast is clear." As Byron sat up, Lonnie unfolded the hash brown wrapper and ate the rest of the patty. "You eat like a dog," Byron said. "That's why your gut hurts all the time." "That nurse said my flora was off." "Well, I'm not getting into a thing about your flora. You can just stick to the plan so we can make a little money, all right?" "There's more of them than there is of us," Lonnie said, "like 10 times more." "Of who?" "Bacteria." Lonnie crumpled the paper and belched. "I should have had a yogurt."
That's a great place to start.
There's the setup.
The brothers watching the house. So I'm going to start by talking with you about some of the characters. When I first read the book, I thought Sophia's the main character. But in rereading the book, she doesn't have as much time as I thought in my mind. There are so many amazing characters in this book and little characters that are important to different things. But Sophia is sort of the main character, we'll call her. She is an anthropologist, which I had to look up the difference between anthropologist and an archaeologist, meaning that
There's a secret. A few years ago, I did too. I kind of let them all blend.
Yeah, so what I learned was an anthropologist studies like how language evolved and migration about cultures, whereas archaeologists are more interested in the physical aspects of it. So that's what I learned. And so Sophia is an anthropologist, and she goes out to work at the Utah-Arizona border. She's interested in history, but not, she wants to know like what people, like present people have done to this history. To quote from the book here, I pulled it. It says, she's doing work to help us document the ruins of the indigenous peoples who disappeared from the Southwest around 700 years ago. And the data she collects will go into the archaeological record to help guide policy and decision-making as it relates to the use of our public lands and resources. And that is what she is out there for. And a lot of her colleagues are not, they don't take the same stance as her. Can you talk a little bit about her stance in regards to the past?
Well, one of the things for Sophia is that over the course of the book, I think that her position changes. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do for her, that she came out kind of with a graduate school abstract idea of what was supposed to happen. And so that passage that you read, that was kind of like the thesis statement for the project that she was supposed to do. But then as she starts to interact on the ground with people, with other folks, meeting tribal folks from the area and whatever, then she starts to get a more complex understanding of what's going on. But the cool thing that I was trying to work on with Sophia is I wanted her to be a fighter. I wanted her to be real tough and real outspoken and kind of hold to these positions. So there's that section where it's kind of a flashback where she gets in trouble, where somebody from UNESCO comes to talk at graduate school at a symposium. And Sophia says, she calls his work McHeritage. And then her teacher pulls her aside and says, I kind of get what you're doing, but you're going to mess up your funding. And I wanted to show how complex this idea is. There's this stuff that people feel like they need to do, but then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're doing it from inside a government structure, like the BLM or the national parks, and it's on a grant. So it's supposed to be something else. And so I wanted her to Sophia to kind of be at the center of a whole bunch of things that are pulling her in these different directions. It's other characters that she meets. It's these Ashdown brothers from the beginning. It's the Ranger Paul that she ends up on part of the adventure with. It's the German guy. They all kind of are inflecting what Sophia thinks about what's supposed to be going on. Because the more reading and research that I did on what we do with parks or with museums or with repositories, I felt like I would be able to read more and feel a little bit clearer about what kinds of things were supposed to happen. I didn't end up with that sense. I just ended up with heaps and heaps more complexity. So that's, I think, what people will see in the book is that just gets more and more complex. And it certainly doesn't like come down to, well, here's the answer about everything that's supposed to happen. Does that kind of hit it for you? I love Sophia a great deal. She's part of me. Like there's a part of my brain that is that kind of fighter who wants to always kind of punch up. And so she's kind of dear to my heart in that way.
So what I love about this book is I kind of think of it as a menacing comedy of errors, because at the very beginning, which you just started with Byron and Lonnie, there is going to be an act of violence, but this book is also so funny. But Byron and Lonnie are the original menace in this book. They're these two brothers. They're the known criminal element in their town. They're poachers. Byron just got out of jail. And they're hired to steal these maps from Bruce Clough, who is an older gentleman who lives in the town, and he has been basically hoarding artifacts for many years. And so they're hired to steal maps from him, but they mess up the job horribly. And so now we also have Nick Scissors, who comes in to sort of clean up their mess. I liked him. I find him to be like a combination of both Anton from No Country for Old Men and also Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction. I have a lot of film references because I know that's your thing. And then we have, like you mentioned, Paul the Ranger, who is like this heartthrob that Sophia is really interested in. And Mrs. Gladstone, who is her landlord, is a sort of aging beauty that has the mobile home park where she lives, and possibly my favorite character, Reinhardt, the German dermatologist, which is really fun to say. And then also my other favorite character, because I can't forget him, Mikros, Mrs. Gladstone's Pomeranian. Like probably the scariest, most threatening character in the book, who's always eating something. And I got the impression that like if Mrs. Gladstone passed away on her own, he would not wait very long to eat her.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a reason why there are Pomeranian vampires in Blade 3. Like those are scary dogs. But so I want to know to start. You don't have to tell me, but I'm going to ask where you came up with this idea for the book.
Two ideas kind of collided, so it's a little bit of like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. I had Reinhardt as a character actually in Kenji. They were characters from something else. They were two people who were going to meet in a similar way they do in the book, and they were going to have their own adventure. Because I got very fascinated with this idea that there's a whole subsection of German culture super into Native American stuff, such that it is the German perception of it. And there's also a really strong Japanese subculture, very into cowboys. I mean, they import boots and jeans and they line dance. And so I was really interested in those two ideas of people who had this idea of Americanness. So that was something that I had that was sitting around. And then the other idea just came from living in Southern Utah. I mean, one of the things that happens all the time around here is this tension with the parks, including a lot of these old timers that were living in my neighborhood who kind of knew all the secrets. I mean, they're bits and pieces of construction, these people that like hand-drawn maps thrown out in diners at breakfast as people are setting out to do this. And there are people in the towns, I mean, their whole homes are full of stuff that they've found over 40 or 50 years. So I wanted to just bring all those things together. And then I guess like the third intersecting thing was watching what the outgoing administration was doing with Bears Ears and Escalante Grand Staircase, these national monuments, wanting to say, we want to shrink these things down. So I just sort of let myself write out of what I felt like was going on. A lot of these people were people that I'd come across just by taking adventures down into that area. It's an area of Arizona and Utah called the Arizona Strip. And it's just this weird kind of no man's land. One of the reasons that the fundamentalists, the religious fundamentalist group, the polygamous women, they lived down there is because it was one of those last places where the government wanted to even like take care of people. But this is the section of the country too where those Bundys kind of had gathered and have kind of grown out of that soil. So I just kind of let stuff happen. But I also took a big car trip prior to that, like 9 days where I just drove through and let stuff soak in and took notes. And so it felt a little bit like anthropology, maybe, or ethnography. And I just sort of observed things and let them kind of bank up in my notebooks. And then that was the raw materials that I went back in to create these inventions. So that's where it all came from. But another thing that drove it was, for years, I took college students into national parks through this grant-funded program with the national parks. And it was really amazing. We took some to Acadia, and that was cool too.
Oh, yay!
And so we got a chance to go. I got a chance to go with college students all over. But one of the things that kept coming up over and over again were these weird intersections about the impacts on place. We get to spend a lot of time in the parks with rangers taking us kind of behind the scenes to show us how a park works. And so some of the things from my notebook from there came in to kind of create this big mishmash. And I felt like this is the time to talk about this. And I feel like I got really lucky for this being a book that I think fits the time. If it, 5 years ago or 5 years from now, it may not be as meaningful. I really hope the stuff that we're talking about is going to be even more meaningful now that Deb Haaland is going to be the Secretary of the Interior, and we get a whole different chorus of voices that are going to be able to talk about public lands. But that was something that I thought about a lot. And then because I deal with stress by being sarcastic and humorous, I think that's why that tone came through, because I started it right about 2016, if you can kind of mark that time. So this book is one of my ways that I kind of coped with the last 4 years.
I just realized now that I forgot to mention one of the other most important characters in the book, who is Patrick Dalton, the sheriff of the town, who is aware of these brothers. He has to go investigate because the man that they are stealing the maps from, the Byron and Lonnie, he dies. Everything goes wrong. He dies. And so Patrick Dalton, the sheriff, shows up, and he's kind of like this like hangdog, just getting divorced, kind of bummed out that his the friend of the family has just died now. And one of the things I loved about this is how this is sort of like a rudimentary metaphor, and I'm very sorry, I'm just forming it right now, but how sort of all these characters cross paths. Like Sophia, gets cut off by the brothers, and then she runs into them later. And the sheriff pulls them over, and he pulls Nick Scissors over, and then all of a sudden, like, the laces get pulled like really tight, like they all come together. Like, I just loved how they kind of like floated in and out of each other's lives. But do you have a favorite character in this book? And who do you think is the conscience of the book, like the soul of the book? Which character?
Oh, those are two great questions. I want to back up and say, you said it was a rudimentary metaphor. Totally not. I have notes, and I should send it to you just so you can see it. I have a little map I drew that was called Crisscrossy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, and maybe it's because I'm a child of the 80s and I was thinking crisscross and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I needed to sort of get in my head, how would these intersections happen? But intersections made it sound too intense, but I wanted this kind of flowing thing to happen.
Well, you do have a lot of characters. I mean, it's very ambitious, and you pull it off. It's amazing. But was there ever a time when you were like, wow, a lot of characters?
I think that was one of the things I just let happen to me while I was writing, because I think if anybody in their right mind wouldn't have ever set out to do a book like that. But I think you said in your podcast about it, seeing it as Northern exposure kind of meets No Country for Old Men. Yeah. And I'm a child of Northern exposure was like my family's deal. Like it was a real important thing. And it turns out later, one of the people that I worked with was an extra in Northern exposure. When I was working up just north of Seattle in the San Juan Islands at a YMCA camp. And one of the ladies there, so she would come back and tell us behind the scenes at the set stuff about all the quirky people. So I do have this fascination with great big ensemble casts where everybody's really super interesting in their own way. And I had that kind of as a challenge. But you were asking, who's my favorite character? It shifts around. Like, I think when I was doing my big final draft before I submitted it, it was Sophia. Like, I was really trying to understand her the most deeply. There's various times where I think that Kenji, the video game designer, is my favorite character because he's just so aloof and cool, and he's got like a Hello Kitty motorcycle jacket. And I sort of pumped all of my I wish I was as cool as that dude guy. He's got all the money in the world, so he doesn't worry. But I think right now, because I was talking to a friend of mine who just finished the book, I think Euphranea from the end, remember the one who picks them up? There's a fundamentalist polygamist lady who gives our characters a ride, and she's tough as nails, and I guess she's just really dear to me at this point, the more that I think about her. And so she's one of those little ones that I wanted to give like the full complete spark of life rather than just let her be a prop or something, to let her have this like full and complete life. And she has a moment when she gets really, really angry, and I won't give it away because it's kind of a nice moment, but maybe it's because of all this garbage stuff that's going on. I wish that I could respond to some of this garbage the way that Euphranea did when it kind of all went kaboom. But I really like her. If there's a character who's the conscience, I think maybe it's Reinhardt.
That's what I was gonna say.
Because Reinhardt is a German dude who saved up all of his money and decided he wanted to come on one of these big tours to see all the things that he wanted. And the tour is called Ranches, Relics, and Ruins, right? It's going to show you cowboy stuff. It's going to show you Native American stuff. It's going to show you all this stuff that's the mythology of the West. And he was like, this is cool. And then he realizes that he's kind of stuck in a sham, that he's going to these places that's full of like cheap imported goods and fake stuff and grody cheeseburgers and not even really country music. And he just gets down about it. And that was, I think that that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, is how we have this thing out here in the West, this projection that's supposed to draw tourists.
Mhm.
Then I think when they show up, that's not what it is at all. It's something else. And so even the idea, like from what you mentioned at the beginning, hey, that the Native American people disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear. There's Native American people all over. It's complicated because a lot of them moved to urban locations because of termination policy and stuff that like Louise Erdrich wrote about great in The Night Watchman, and Tommy Orange has written about in There. But that's a wrong idea. And so Reinhardt is the person who gets to experience all the wrong ideas revealing themselves to him. And then he's the one, I think, who changes the most. He comes to, in the beginning of the book, as one person, and then he's transformed by the end of the book into something else different.
Well, he has quite an ordeal. I'm not going to spoil it, but he does experience quite an ordeal. I think that's a great place, if you wouldn't mind reading that little bit about Reinhardt that you have.
Okay. So Reinhardt's a good guy. He'd done a heroic thing. And this is a moment that comes right after the heroic thing. And I have to find exactly the right part. I've marked it. Okay. Reinhardt Kupfer boarded the Bryce Canyon shuttle bus. I have to say, I have some friends who are at Bryce Canyon right now sending me pictures of Bryce Canyon, and I wish I could share it with you, but every few minutes, another image from Bryce Canyon pops up in my text messages. So I think that they're dirty dogs for doing that. Reinhardt Kupfer boarded the Bryce Canyon shuttle bus at the Agua Canyon stop. Hot and dusty, he found a seat near the back and scooted next to the window. A large man with mutton chops sat next to him, a walking stick with a half dozen fantastic human faces carved into its length, resting between his knees. When the bus pulled out, Reinhardt opened his shirt pocket and dug out a small obsidian arrowhead, which he held in the palm of his hand and admired. It was a jet black, nearly perfect, side-notched triangle flake, roughly the size of his thumbnail, more like a fighter jet than he would have imagined. He turned it over and over, testing the edge with the tip of his thumb. "Where'd you get that?" the man next to him asked. "I found it on my hike." "Can I see it?" Reinhardt set it in the man's wide hand and watched him as he poked it with his finger. "It looks real," he said. It is, I think. "I'm going to find the ranger who spoke to us yesterday and ask her," Reinhardt said, reaching for the artifact. The man's hand veered away. "I never saw one close up like this," he said. "My cousin found one once, said it was real, but we all thought it was just some broken rock. I mean, that's what it looked like. But this one is for real." Reinhardt set his hand lightly on the man's wrist. "I'm not going to steal it," he said. "It's just cool to hold." "Of course you wouldn't," Reinhardt said. "It's just that I would hate for it to drop." The man returned the arrowhead to Reinhardt's hand. Well, Reinhardt and the guy, they kind of ride around the park in the shuttles, and I'll just kind of skip that part and get right to the next action point. The bus came to a stop at Sunset Point, and the others began filing off. The man sitting next to him said, "Have a good one." Reinhardt nodded to him. "You also," he said. On the sidewalk, Reinhardt checked his phone again. Wolf, and Wolf is his business partner back in Germany. I think it's the only name that pops up in here. Wolf had sent him a photo of the walnut shadow box he kept on his desk. It was filled with a dozen stone points, each one a different material and shape. The message said this was an auspicious beginning. Reinhardt put his phone away and continued along the sidewalk, following the brown signs that pointed the way to the rim. In the gaps between the pines, white clouds piled on top of each other, and in the negative space of the clouds, cerulean pools of sky gathered. It was a color he'd seen many times in paintings, but never this intensely. With his eyes focused on the sky, Reinhardt approached the rim of what the park pamphlets called a hoodoo-filled amphitheater. And from those quaint words, he expected to find a mere curiosity, a playground of geologic novelties. Instead, what he saw was hewn straight from the earth and scattered across the horizon like something built and abandoned by giants at play. In a single sweep of his vision lay every possible variation of standing rock, Fingers, columns, teeth, pillars, knobs, turrets, toadstools, minarets, pilasters, pylons. His breath left him all at once. And as he inched forward, the parallax of the scene shifted, and he began to sense in the core of his belly, before he actually saw it, the precipitous drop of the rim, hidden by an innocuous patch of tawny, tufted grass. As he lifted his gaze, he took in each successive plane, the closer formations crisp and defined, and those at a distance becoming by intervals more impressionistic. At the horizon was a great silent dome, fading slowly in and out of the atmospheric haze. 100 miles southward across the expanse, a hard black rain fell into the dry air, evaporating on the way down. A soundless arc of white electricity pulsed from the cloud and forked delicately against the flat colors in the distance. Reinhardt waited for a second strike, but it did not come. A few seconds later, the faintest rumble. A couple passed Reinhardt on the left, talking excitedly about the sublime view. Their teenage son lagged behind, typing something into his phone. Without looking up, he said, "We came all the way here for this?" "Put your phone away, Miles," his dad said, but the boy ignored him. Well, Reinhardt meets some people and then carries on to the next place. He gets himself over to the visitor center. And, I turned the page prematurely. Reinhardt left the sidewalk and wove through the trees to the lodge and caught the shuttle back to the visitor center. The ride was short, so he stood. He stepped off the bus quickly and went into the building looking for Sophia. He was thinking about the ideal of provenance, how she had told them the most important question anyone can ask of a thing is, who did it once belong to and who does it belong to now? His thought, who owns history, was at the forefront of it all, matched now with the question of who owns this park and the things inside it. He wanted to let her know that what she said hadn't fallen on deaf ears. There was a desk in the center, near the back, past the t-shirts, baseball hats, and children's toys, by the cash registers and the day's weather report. A ranger with clear cat eye glasses and a green tattoo of a Celtic knot on her forearm was sharing information about a trail with the young people. From the green, white, and red tricolor patch on the tourist backpack, he could see that they were Italian. When they were done, Reinhardt stepped to the desk, removed the arrowhead, and placed it in front of the ranger. She looked down at it and then at Reinhardt over her glasses. "Hello," he said. "Yesterday, I was at the lodge for a presentation on antiquities. There was a young archaeologist there, and I would like to ask her some questions about this arrowhead I found today on my hike in Agua Canyon." The ranger picked up the arrowhead and turned it over a couple of times. "Sir," she said, "it's against the law to take things from the park. We have over 2 million visitors to this park every year. If everybody pocketed one thing, there wouldn't be much of this park left to visit." "I'm sorry. I didn't know," he said. She set the arrowhead back down on the counter, and Reinhardt was not sure if he should take it back. "This is what we mean when we tell people to leave no trace. But in this particular case, I'm not going to cite you. This arrowhead actually comes from right over there." She pointed to a rack of costume jewelry a dozen feet away in the gift shop, next to some multicolored scorpion refrigerator magnets. She pushed the arrowhead toward Reinhardt. "It's okay," she said. "Take a look." Reinhardt accepted the false treasure, walked over to the display of necklaces made of fake leather cord and an arrowhead in the same perfect black triangle shape with identical chips and ridges. He ran his hand behind them like they were strands in a beaded curtain. He glanced back at the ranger, who smiled slightly and shrugged. "Sorry," she said, "but thank you for leaving the trail cleaner than you found it."
So, would you mind talking a little bit more about this idea that, in the book they discuss how there are millions and millions of artifacts that are just stacked up everywhere, all around the world, hidden away, most of them, like nobody gets to see them. People just seem to amass them, but nobody's seeing them. Sophia obviously feels very strongly about them. There is a point in the book where she kind of tears up in part because she's thinking about mummies on display forever in a museum. And, would you just talk a little bit about, how you feel about this idea that, you know, all this cultural appropriation and antiquities theft, and, you know, it's just sitting in storage now.
So one of the first epiphanies I had working on this was when I was in London at the British Museum, seeing all this stuff. And I felt myself going through a couple of really kind of, I guess, complex collisions of ideas. The first one was, I'm looking at the Rosetta Stone. And there's these amazing Babylonian sculptures. This is so cool. Like, and then I started going, but wait a minute. I went to graduate school. One of the things that I studied was critical theory and philosophies of colonialism, Edward Said, and so many other things that we were taught about. That's like, okay, wait a minute. There was this Orientalist movement where, you know, Victorian culture, particularly British, but also American, French, and other European cultures, they went out into the world and they brought all this stuff back. And then they put it here and they thought it was for the public good. I mean, I don't think anybody thought at the time that they were doing something terrible. They thought they were doing something marvelous. And then over time, what happened is the conversations opened up with the people from whom these things were taken. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not 100% sure that should have happened. And so there's some complex stuff that Sophia goes through, which is I'm learning about this stuff in my own graduate program. And now I feel ambivalent about it. And so we have these things that was a certain approach to, and I have to say, I'm not an archaeologist or an anthropologist or whatever. I'm doing this through reading and research and thinking on my own. But there seems to be this kind of complex thing. Do you leave the stuff there and then leave it in jeopardy for the people who may come upon it? You know, like with that monolith that appeared suddenly out in Moab, right? Like this thing appeared and then everybody wanted to go see it. And then so somebody says, we have to get rid of it because it's a nuisance. So there's some idea that you leave that stuff out there and you create this intense desire for people to want to go see that, and that creates impacts. The other thing would be, well, let's then remove it carefully and take it back into museums and repositories like the Peabody or like the London Museum or whatever. I mean, the British Museum. And then this is how we'll preserve this kind of stuff. And that's a really colonialist idea about how to do this. And then there's people who say we'll use technology to keep it in place, or we'll do complex things around that. And so these were the thoughts that I let kind of funnel through Sophia, that she could represent certain ideas. And then Paul, the other ranger character, says, well, there's this other way that we might be able to do this. And then, you know, there's all these questions that pop up about what do we do? And, you know, I think one of the really articulate people about this is Craig Childs, who's written a lot about this and like Finders Keepers and other books. But there's also some amazing books. Like I read The Repatriation Reader, which is a whole series of essays from anthropologists and writers that are talking about, well, what does it mean now that we have this stuff and how do we get it back into the right places? And so that was a lot of the reading that I did. And it sounds so heavy, but it was one of the things that I wanted to kind of leaven this kind of weird madcap book with. Like, let's take everybody on a ride that I hope is really fun. But then at various points of this kind of comedy, I wanted to have, you know, like when you're on a vacation and they have one of those little plinths with a plaque on it. I was hoping that like throughout the book, there might be those little plaques that said, oh, hey, by the way, while we're laughing at this kind of weird murdery thing, let's also think about this other stuff that's going on. Okay, cool. Let's go back on our trip and keep going. And so that was a bunch of stuff I was trying to kind of keep up in the air, but it also happened while I was writing. I want to learn more about this. And then what I learned that felt to me like the truth wasn't really the surface stuff that I started with. And so I felt like each successive path through successive drafts was teaching me more stuff about this. And I think probably pretty annoying to talk to for a while, because there was a period where this is all I wanted to tell people about. I was like the crazy guy downtown with like the end is nigh sign, but it was like, they're stealing, it's all stealing. So maybe I can calm down now that this is published and it's out.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions about writing. We're going to switch it up a little bit. Okay. First of all, I just want to say that I laughed out loud all through the book, which like never happens when I'm reading, you know, just even once usually. And when I used to work in a bookstore, people would be like, I want to read a funny book. I want to read a funny book. And it just seems so hard to find books that are funny. And I was wondering if you did mention saying like you felt kind of sarcastic and that kind of came out in this book, but if you think that writing humor is easy, or if you have any ideas as to why writing funny books is so hard.
That's a hard question to answer because it is hard, but I sort of made the mistake of getting myself all like committing to funny. Because I think that it came from those Ashdown brothers that I was reading about at the front. I really like pairs. This book has a lot of pairs in it. Sophia and Paul, the Ashdown brothers, a character we didn't talk about, Raylene, and we'll just kind of let that stay there. But the way that Sheriff Dalton and Raylene travel together, and I wanted to just let there be situations where I got to write funny conversations, and that may be like one of the things that drove me for my writing. I like to write funny dialogue, and it sounds dumb if somebody's having funny dialogue with themselves. But the thing that's difficult, particularly when you're kind of trying to write something funny about something as serious as all this other matter of cultural appropriation, theft, colonialism, occupation, I felt like I almost kind of had an obligation to be funny after a while, because otherwise it would just be too sad. And so I wanted to try to make sure that there was some balance, or, I mean, heaven forbid, a spoonful of sugar, which I just learned the other day came from putting the polio vaccine in a sugar cube. I had no freaking idea. Thank you, NPR, for that. But I wanted to kind of work with that idea that in order to sort of keep the book moving in a way that was useful for me, I wanted to find these ridiculous, humorous situations. Again, maybe mostly for myself, but maybe because I was hoping that a reader wouldn't end up just like this after a while, and carry through. And a lot of the people that I'm reading, was reading at the time, like Vine Deloria Jr., Custer Died for Your Sins is a great, fantastic book, also hilarious. And I felt like, you know what? Okay, let's go for it.
Well, it works perfectly. I mean, it's an amazing balance of serious and funny. And
thanks.
Now you also teach film studies, so I have to ask, I mean, this book is extremely cinematic and the dialogue is so snappy. I mean, it would really work as an adaptation. Have you thought of like a dream cast? Do you have specific characters in mind for these characters?
It's embarrassing, but yes, absolutely.
You don't have to tell me you're embarrassed. I just
no, it's embarrassing because it's sort of it seems absolutely like something that should happen, but it's sort of like you don't want to put it out there. But some of them are obvious, like Christoph Waltz to be Reinhardt. He was from, for people who don't know, he was in Inglourious Bastards, and he did a bunch of work with Tarantino and so forth. I feel like he would be perfect because he's just so low key and refined for Reinhardt. He would be fantastic. I would love Lonnie to be Adam Driver.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
But I haven't really settled on who would be a perfect Byron. But in my mind, I kind of think of him as like thick Tom Cruise. In some kind of, just a kind of weird way. Like if Tom Cruise was like two Tom Cruises side by side, like stretched out. I've thought a little bit about all the different people that could be Sophia, and there are so many. Because she's of mixed heritage, she's Iranian American, and I think that there are so many actresses that could do that really well. So I wouldn't commit to that, but I think about it. The big one that if it ever happened, I would love to see Jeff Bridges play Dreamweaver, who's this really kooky recluse. Just because when I wrote it, I'll just admit it, I was thinking about what would happen if the dude was stuck out in a trailer in the desert and actually had helped invent the internet. And then I kind of let myself go with that. But sometimes it can be really hampering to kind of lock it down to somebody, but I did think about some of those people. Dalton, he's a mystery. I have no idea who would be great for him, and I would have to leave it in the imaginary world where this could happen, where be somebody like that. But they would have to all look weird and different, like you see in Coen Brothers movies or in Twin Peaks, where everybody's face is so marvelous and weird and like fat and triangular shaped. I think about those kind of cartoon ways of representing people, and that's the stuff I imagine.
Now we're going to open it up to questions in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you one more thing, which is kind of like I don't even know the terminology for this, but I did notice that the book is broken down into days. It's like day 1, day 2, day 3. But then for each day, I was curious what this was called. You have like these little rundown things that happen. You can't really see it here. Like happen inside the chapter. For instance, it says like day 3, fake news, far from the madding crowd, a time of reinvention, death by PowerPoint, kind of like breaking down what happens in the chapter. And I was curious as to if that had an actual term and why you chose to do that.
I'm almost certain that it does have a term, but I didn't know what it was, but I can tell you where I copped it from. One of my favorite old books is Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd, which appears in the book. It's one of the audiobooks that Sophia listens to while she's driving around. And Hardy does this really well in that book. And it's pretty common in 19th century books to have that kind of summary. And I think that it has its history when books were delivered episodically, so that you see that. But Cormac McCarthy also did it in Blood Meridian. And I thought, what if we did a triangle between this kind of lighthearted way that Thomas Hardy did it with the really weird and kind of scriptural way that Cormac McCarthy did it, with the kind of humorous way that it happened in like Arrested Development, and then see what could happen. Because I wanted to try to play against what do those things say and what expectations did they build. Because I imagined that a voracious reader might kind of go after this book, but a leisurely reader might just kind of read it like day by day. Like, I'll just read a day and see what happened here for this day. Or maybe have the book with them on vacation and use it to terrorize themselves while they're trying to relax. But that was a really kind of fun way to structure it. And it came in late in the draft. After everything was there, I sort of went back into Thomas Hardy and read that, and then said, let's do this. I mean, it was straight up theft, but it's a book about theft, so there should be some stealing in it too, structurally.
It completely works. So I'm going to ask you one more question. Actually, I lied. I want to ask you one more question that I like to ask authors. Are you reading anything now that you're enjoying? Have you read anything recently that you've enjoyed? Anything that you want to recommend to people out there listening?
This summer, I read Stephen Graham Jones' The Only Good Indians. It's unbelievable. It's so freaking crazy, and I'm jealous. It's, if you haven't read it, it's a kind of reservation slasher movie novel, and he does some really amazing things with point of view. And it absolutely gripped me and like shot me through. I usually am a pretty slow reader. And it was the most recent book I've read that was really, really scary, but it was also deliciously written, and I really liked it. And I am halfway through Megha Majumdar's Burning, which is also really wonderful and not at all kind of what I expected. And so that's really, really super delightful. But I have to admit, I get distracted. George Saunders' new book just came here like last week, and I knew it was a mistake. I cracked open into it. This is the one where he's doing like these different close reading of Russian short stories that he's been teaching for 20 years. And his prose and his insights are super delightful. And so I'm finding myself kind of getting derailed into that. But it's really, really, really delicious. And so now I'm kind of switching up because the semester is going. I'm teaching and reading a lot of things right now, kind of for work. But that's delicious. But I'm reading some old Conan the Barbarian stories for other weird reasons. And they are capturing my imagination because I read that stuff when I was a teenager. So I don't know if it would be generally interesting, but I'm like, how strange that these things even exist. So that's kind of like what's juggling through in my mind right now. But Burning is marvelous. Oh my gosh.
It's so good.
It's really great. It
was on like every best of list last year. It's incredible. I have to tell you, for Christmas, I treated myself to a Shudder subscription. because I felt like I should be watching more horror movies. And then the next day, I read the new Stephen Graham Jones that's coming out in the fall, which is about a girl who's obsessed with slasher films. And
Is
the
it
book
the chainsaw in my heart?
my heart is a chainsaw.
My
Yeah,
heart is a chainsaw.
the book spoils about 250 slasher movies. I was like, I don't need this Shudder subscription anymore. That was I'm like, I know everything that happens in all these movies now, which I just thought was so funny. So we have a question here from Rosalind Eves. Todd, what was the most interesting part of the research you did for the book, and what's something you learned that didn't make it into the book?
Oh, those are two really great questions. The most interesting thing came early on. I was talking to an anthropologist, a colleague of mine, about the book, and it was recommended to take a look at two master's theses about this kind of thing. My understanding was that the big impact was individual pot hunters like the Ashdown brothers. And this is in one of these master's theses, it said, it's not. These people are no big deal. It's large scale development. And so when they're like a lot of this in Arizona or in Southern Utah, when they're building, I mean, this is like straight out of Poltergeist kind of stuff, right? Like they're putting in housing developments, and it's across this land that had been populated. These were burial areas and other kinds of stuff. And so there's a kind of indifference that comes from the voracious mouths of development that does this. And so there's a bunch of stats on this and facts and figures that was on that. And so that was actually one of the things that drove the plot line, because the plot line kind of goes from little theft to bigger theft to bigger theft to bigger theft to bigger theft. And that trajectory came from that early on research. So some of the stuff that made into the book, I'm not even going to talk about, because I talked to some people around the area, and some were from the Paiute tribe. And some of the things they told me about their experiences of encountering artifacts, including remains in the homes of people, directly were bone chilling. But as they told that kind of stuff to me, it was good to know that I was kind of in the right territory. But I felt like those were their stories, and they needed to be able to be the ones that could share those stories. And so there's quite a few things. I mean, there's a lot of things that came up. I had a friend that brought me into a sweat lodge that he does, and I've gone a few times, and being part of that circle and understanding those kinds of things from the inside, they also kind of come with an obligation to just kind of be cool about the stuff that you say. So it was pretty interesting to be in that learning that kind of stuff. I spent an evening in a Paiute language class, watching the little kids learn the language from the elders, and it was just marvelous. But again, it felt like something that was for them and for their community, and not for my book. But it was really nice to just get a sense of just being able to sit aside and listen to this kind of transaction happen. So that kind of stuff.
So I have another question here for you. It's from Tasha. It says, what kind of work did you do to make sure your characters were authentic, especially when they have characteristics other than your own, as in gender, race, ethnicity, etc.?
I asked a lot of questions. My wife helped me out a lot. She reads early versions. So a lot of the stuff that happened, like with Sophia, because again, I was writing across gender lines, how to make some of this stuff work. And in fact, I think I know Tasha, and Tasha is one of the people that helped me out when I was asking these questions. And there's some, I don't want to be essentialist about it, but there's some kind of ways that men like react to things that if I just went with that automatic sense, it might have felt false. But friends of mine, and my wife in particular, said you need to focus a little bit more on internal states, like particularly when you're writing fear. Like, what does it feel like inside, and how do those feelings change? And so it was really great to just break it down and say, you tell me, here's the situation, you tell me what it's like to have this kind of feel this way. And so that was, I think every time you're trying to write across boundaries like that, it's really, really hard. Sometimes I get the sense of people saying, you know what, I don't even want to touch that. But for me, reading is so much about empathy that I want to make sure that I hope that people who are not like me are reading my books. So I want to make sure that when I'm kind of writing across those lines, I want to try to make sure I do the work to figure out what's going on. But sometimes it's in that kind of delicate territory like across gender or maybe across some cultural lines, because there's a Paiute character in there. But sometimes it's just about disciplinary stuff. So I spent some time talking to an archaeologist friend of mine and an anthropologist friend of mine to get a sense of kind of how that stuff works. And then I have a friend who's a cop out in Oregon. And like when a windshield got shot up, I just got on Facebook Messenger and I said, hey, man, can you talk to me? And he says, you are in luck. We just had a training where we shot out different kinds of auto glass.
Oh, wow.
And so he was able to kind of pull some of that back together. Or I would say, I want to do a procedure like this. Hey, Matt, can you tell me what you would do? Like when the Ashdowns get pulled over, like where would the hands go? And so it's just, I feel like even though it's fiction, one of the things you want to do is try to make it plausible. You know, like Tom Wolfe said, you know, like fiction has an obligation to be plausible and nonfiction doesn't. So I try to make sure that I can learn that. And I know that there's always going to be failings. It's probably always going to come short when you try that. But to quote Lyle Lovett, what would you be if you didn't even try? And so I think that that's what you should shoot for.
So I'm going to ask you one last question before we wrap up here. Thank you so much for doing this and for answering all these questions. And my question for you is, can you see yourself revisiting these characters, or do you have plans for already to revisit these characters?
I do. I would love to spend more time with them. I am hatching an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I've sent it off to my agent to see what he thinks about it. If people like it and stick with it and want to see with it, I have a path forward. But the problem is, if I talk about it, it'll give away the big stuff at the end of the book.
Right.
But it's something that would materialize out of there. But again, I'm a big like movie fan, and so I was thinking that there's this between Paul and Sophia, there was this kind of indeterminate, maybe quasi non-romantic relationship or suspended romantic relationship. But I really like the Nick and Nora Charles from the Thin Man movies from like the 30s and stuff like that. And I thought it could be kind of fun to play with those two characters as kind of like two strong male and female characters moving through. I think they probably might drink a little bit less than they did in the Thin Man movies. But what would it be like if there was these two kind of like antiquities investigators that met up with something again? And again, if people come asking for more Picnic in the Ruins, I think that there's some in there.
What about a Mikros spinoff?
Mikros, cats have 9 lives. I don't know how many dogs have, but Mikros might have used hers up.
Well, that's great. So thank you so much. Is Allie going to be joining us again? Oh, I see the mute off. Yes.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for all the great questions. It was fun to be able to talk about it. You do a book and then you put it out into the world, and then it's amazing to me how sort of quickly it's easy to forget what you even wrote. And so it's really, this kind of event is really great for reminding you, like, oh, here's the things that I kind of put into it over these last few years.
It's also a very different kind of world that the book went out into this time around for a lot of authors. This is a very different experience having a book out. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, thank you guys both so much. This was such a good conversation. I loved silently listening to everything you guys are talking about. Everyone, thank you so much in the comments for chatting. Definitely check out the books. Go buy the book. It is great. Go read it. You'll love it. I linked a couple of the other ones that came up. I have read The Only Good Indians, and I second. Also, so great book. And I've heard nothing but great things about The Burning. So, you can't go wrong. Thank you guys all so much for being here. This was so wonderful, and I will have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, Allie, and thanks, Liberty, so much.
Thank you. Bye.